I'm finally getting behind the wheel of a car I've loved for absolutely years and I've never yet had a chance to drive. And this is an interesting one because there are two versions of this car. This is the Fiat Coupe, the crazy slash-sided sports car that Fiat brought us in the middle of the 1990s. And the crescendo of this range was the 20-valve version. There was a 20-valve turbo, but I've never driven that, and I've never driven the regular 20-valve. And I'd really like to find out what a 20-valve non-turbo feels like, because some people think that is the better option. So today we're going to go for a ride in one and see exactly what it's like. Now if you hit like and subscribe and have a word from our sponsors, then on with the review. Furious Driving, proud to be supported by Bidding Classics, the online classic car marketplace with more cars added every week. Diamond Bright, protecting, cleaning and caring for the Furious fleet and for yours with 10% off using code FD10. And Lancaster Insurance cover the Furious fleet. They are one of the biggest specialist insurers in the UK, covering all areas of vintage to modern classic cars and motorbikes. Follow the links in the description below. So this, the Fiat Coupe, or Type 175 in Fiat speak, came about in 1993 and it ran on in one single generation, unfacelifted pretty much, till 2000. But it all came about more or less by accident. Oh, unrestricted road. Oh, that's a great engine. Because in the turn of the 1990s, Pininfarina had been building the Cadillac Alante. This was, of course, an unmitigated disaster. I believe Hubnut drove one recently. I think it's actually not a bad car, but it's an absolute disaster of a business model and not what the market wanted. Anyway, this meant that Pininfarina's production line was sitting idle, doing nothing, needed something to fill it. Meanwhile, Fiat had been looking for a new halo model, something exciting to put in their showrooms and draw people in from the street. They may want to come in and look at the coupe. They're going to drive off in a Brava or a Punto or a 500 or whatever, a 127 probably. But you know, they needed a halo model. So Pininfarina stepped up and they had a beautiful design on hand waiting to go. Fiat didn't like it. Luckily for us though, Peugeot did, because that went on to become the 406 Coupe. Fiat preferred their own in-house design from Centro Stilo. In fact, from a guy who you probably know called Chris Bangle, who is not a gentleman who is afraid of a little controversy when it comes to his car designs, because, well, the Bangle got BMWs, the Flame Edge, the Alfa 145, which was meant to be a Lancia, did you know? So this thing got people talking for all the right and all the wrong reasons in a way, because some people hated it instantly. Those slashes above the wheel arches really put some people off. But many more people absolutely loved it, because it is a striking looking car, and a coupe needs to look striking. Personally, I have adored this car from the day it was launched. I think they're beautiful and nothing will change my mind. And you know what, the sales figures kind of bear that out, because over the 7 years it was in production, they sold about 72,000 of them. And bear in mind, the coupe is always going to be the halo niche model. It's never going to be the big numbers car. That's quite respectable, 10,000 a year on average of a car which is quite expensive, of limited practicality compared to their hatchback range, and potentially being far more powerful, more expensive to run. So they did pretty well shifting as many as they did. But looking good wasn't the only trump card this car had up its sleeve. It also handles superbly, because this car is built on a well-known Fiat favourite platform, the Type 2 or Tipo platform. And a bit like when people complain the Jaguar X-Types are built on a Mondeo platform, they say it like it's a bad thing. It really isn't a bad thing. The Tipo was a brilliantly engineered car. It is rumoured, and I have heard from people who kind of know these things, that in fact there was at least one F1 engineer on the design team of that platform. So everything that got that car drives brilliantly. And it was a well-used platform by Fiat, because not only did the Tipo get it, the Alfa 145 and 146, the Lancia Delta got it, for goodness sake. The Alfa GTV got it, the Alfa Spider got it, and of course this, the coupe. So in some respects, I'm actually driving the coupe version of my own car. Admittedly, with an equally sonorous and interesting engine, but a very different character to it. because this car has the 20 valve non-turbo 5-cylinder. And although the 220 horsepower turbo does get a lot of the publicity, the shouting if you like, this version, the 20 valve 5-cylinder non-turbo with 147 horsepower, is no slouch. In fact, it's very similar power figures to the Alfa 145 with its 2-litre twin spark. But this, with its 5-cylinder, has a fairly unusual, I wouldn't say unique, because there is a couple of other 5-cylinders which do have a similar kind of thrum to them. Because with that 5-cylinder thrum, it is a very unusual sound. And the power delivery is virtually instant. As I say, the handling is fantastic. It's got McPherson struts at the front, trailing arms at the rear, coil springs all around, anti-roll bars front and rear. The rear suspension is mounted to a subframe, and it is a very well-balanced car indeed. You do feel like you're sitting quite low in it, compared to the 145 where you feel like you're sitting quite high and the pedals are slightly offset. This is a much nicer driving position. You're sitting a little bit lower, with your legs out a little more in front, and the pedals and the steering wheel are nicely in line. That's often a criticism aimed at Italian cars. That yeah, you're sitting all skewiff and wonky and uncomfortable. Not at all in this car, and the headroom is quite decent as well. And it's very sad though that the car wasn't replaced in 2000 when it kind of reached the end of its run. But by that point, the era of the coupe was drawing to a close. Everyone was getting back into hot hatches again after a few years away, having been the biggest thing of the 1980s when coupes had died away. They became a big thing in the 90s. And then into the noughties, it was hot hatches' turn once more. So sadly, off it went, and Fiat lost its halo car, and Fiat hasn't really had a decent halo car ever since. This is 23 years now without anything they can really shout about. The closest really would be the Punto SS or the 500R Bath, but that's not really the same thing. That's not an exciting car in its own right, is it? So this video is both a celebration and a lament for the Fiat Coupe. A brilliant car which was wonderful to drive, wonderful to look at, but sadly there's nothing of its like on the market anymore. The bodywork is striking and curious. It's hand-built by Pininfarina, so it feels more solid than a regular Fiat, more akin to an expensive German coupe with a refined hush on board. Its looks didn't change radically from the prototype. Even Chris Bangle's slats or eyelashes and diagonal swage lines have only been slightly diluted. It was intended to look modern and retro at the same time and echo great Fiats of the past. The metal filler cap reflects Fiat's racing heritage, and the round taillights echo Ferraris of old, and the blunt stubby nose is meant to remind you of a Fiat Dino. Unusually, there's no visual link from front to back, and it has modern curved headlamp covers, and when asked how to wash them, Fiat Design said con amore, or with love. Now let's climb inside the coupe. Now first of all we have this curious B-post mounted handle with a scalloped opening in the post for your fingers. Climb inside. It's a framed rather than a frameless door, and the thing to notice immediately is this metal painted band that runs all the way around the cabin, starting here on the door. It carries on onto the dashboard, through the centre where we have the Pininfarina logo badge in the middle, and off into the other door as well. And this interior is, well, it's one of the standout interiors of the 1990s, it has to be said. Of course much of it is straight from the Fiat parts bin, but the way it's been put together just gives it so much character. The doors are very big, very long doors indeed, but covered in, well, a leather look plastic in the centre, obviously the body colour paint there, plastic door handles, so not quite as feeling as premium as perhaps it could do, and a moulded grip. Then we have a large cubby area and a big loudspeaker. Moving back into the car, we've got a huge tea shelf, so lots of room for ice cream and what have you up here, melting in the sun on a hot day like today on the tea shelf up there. The passenger side does have an airbag and a glove box that opens just there. Airbags were standard across the range, as was air conditioning and ABS. These were very high spec cars indeed. but they've kept the passenger side of the car looking fairly minimalist with just that airbag logo and the air vent over there to keep things amusing. In the middle we've got our recessed plastic air vents in the centre, which I assume are from something else in the Fiat range. Underneath that we've got more Fiat standard buttons for the front and rear fogs, hazard lights, central locking, rear screen heater and a light for the alarm. We do have an analog clock here in the middle with a little blue logo which looks a bit like the Fiat logo that we find here on the middle of the steering wheel. That's all above the heating and ventilation controls, single zone, temperature, fan speed, direction, and this car has got climate control as well because this is a weirdly high spec example of the breed. And that is above the original Fiat Clarion radio. This would have been a really high-end radio back in the mid-1990s. With its huge LCD screen. That's above, sticky, a big ashtray. Now this is a thing I need to come back to immediately because this is a problem which is affecting pretty much all coupes now. This whole centre section from here down to here and back here by the handbrake is coated in like a rubberized plastic stuff. Felt kind of smooth and tactile back in the 90s, but now 25 years on it's actually starting to go weird and break down, and so it's a gooey stuff. It's black on my fingers. That came from the dashboard. So really the only way to deal with it now is to get petrol or thinners or something and wipe it back to the shiny black plastic and then maybe repaint it in a matte black paint or something, because this is a big problem with 90s plastics and rubbers, is that over time they have broken down and they just aren't lasting. So big problem for 90s cars around the corner. Now, stepping back down a little bit, we have got our 5-speed manual gearbox, which is a lovely thing to use, really precise and snicky, perfect for just jumping from ratio to ratio and really enjoying that 5-cylinder power. Surrounding that are the electric window switches left and right and the electric sunroof. This is a very weirdly spec'd car with climate control and a sunroof in here. And then moving back, we have our pyramid-shaped electric mirror switch, which is the same item, I think, and in the same position as in my Alfa 145. Very common thing for Italian cars to have the electric mirrors down here in the middle, curiously. Big cubby hole here, big handbrake, and another cubby hole behind that as well. Now, in front of the driver, the dashboard binnacle area is quite a curiosity, and it's a good looking one as well, because instead of having a separate area for all the dials and things, they are housed in this full body width, body colour metal panel. Just like on a hot rod or something, just cut straight through this metal panel. So we've got our volts and oil pressure in the first, speedo in the second, and it registers up to 160, and in the turbo version that's 155 is actually attainable. The rev counter going up to 7,000 RPM, and here we can see the Velia branding on those, and finally the fuel gauge and temperature gauge, and a little strip underneath for all of our warning lights and things. Behind that we've got the slim drum-like stalks for the wipers and indicators on the left and the right, with that knurled texture, which we also find here on the steering wheel, also on the door pulls. And the steering wheel is a chunky leather thing, feels really, really good in your hand. We've got the horn here. Wow, typical Italian coming through pop. We like that pop a lot. But the design of the centre section is very slim, very modern for the 1990s. You can see the steering wheel wearing a slim, sharply cut grey Italian suit and looking very good in it. Over to the right, you'll notice the entire dashboard is swathed in this fake plastic elephant hide, same as on the door. Another air vent, headlight levelling and panel dimming over here. Interestingly, only two positions for the headlight levelling. Down below we've got our pedals. Interestingly, only the accelerator has been graced with a metal type thing. Everything else is typical rubber gripped pedals. Jumping out of the car to look at the seats, this car, again with the amazing spec, has Momo leather interior, which is not a common option at all. Expensive, but feels so good to sit in, feels so good to touch. That is delightful, and it smells just divine. Now this is actually a 4-seater coupe, although the rear seats are quite tight. We've got more black leather in there, looking really good. We haven't got an enormous amount of legroom, so this is really back seats for kids. I'm not going to try and climb in there. But the headroom is quite good in here as well. Surprisingly, for such a low car, with a sunroof as well, it doesn't feel at all tight. It feels a little bit close along the header rail of the windscreen, because that does feel quite close to your forehead, but everything apart from that, lots of space really. And lift this very sharply creased boot, which you'll notice is completely devoid of anything. No lights, no reflectors, no number plate, no handle. Pull the handle inside the car to open it, and you've got yourself a really good sized boot actually. For a coupe, this is very generous. Quite a useful car really, and the CD changer is hiding. And it had incredible brakes as well. Discs all round obviously, but with Brembo calipers too, so all good in the stopping front. Now unusually, there really wasn't a bad engine option with this car. So often there's the really lame one they just have to put in for emissions, averages and that kind of stuff, but not in this case. When it launched, it had the 4-cylinder aluminium-headed twin-cam Fiat, which they'd used to great success in the Lancia Delta in the World Championship Rally. That was available as 136 normally aspirated or 190 horsepower with a turbo. However, the car really came alive a couple of years later when they fitted the 5-cylinder with 147 horsepower, non-turbo, 220 with the turbo. Now, because this was built on the same platform as the Alfa GTV, they often found themselves as rivals in the same group test, which is sort of amusing because it's almost the same car apart from, well, the bodywork and the engine. But with that Type 2 platform underneath them, the pair of them so often came out on top as the reviewers' favourites in the group tests. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this ride out in this spectacular 20-valve Fiat Coupe. I have certainly loved every moment. In fact, I'm probably going to have voiced over a lot of this because half the time I've just been enjoying the drive rather than commenting on it. If you've enjoyed this, please, as always, hit like and subscribe, and join us again next time driving something completely different.